Okay, so this critique looks at parts of a commentary, one that basically declares war on TPUSA after Charlie Kirk's death, alleging conspiracy, and using old texts to claim special knowledge.
Yeah, it's a pretty charged situation described there.
It is, and the material we reviewed does make a powerful case against Candace Owens' claims. It really highlights that contradiction, using texts about Kirk sensing his death while also complaining there was a succession plan.
That specific point is incredibly strong. The contradiction is laid bare.
But the overall tone, it's very much moral indignation, direct condemnation, lots of calling the claims crazy or batshit.
Right. And that leads us to the first big opportunity we saw. It's about sharpening the argument by elevating the tone.
Elevating the tone. Okay.
So that contradiction you mentioned, premonition versus being angry about a succession plan, that's potent. I mean, the listener found the perfect rhetorical angle there.
Mm-hmm.
But the weakness, really, is that the critique's power gets undercut a bit by relying so much on that emotional language, the condemnation, instead of just dismantling the evidence piece by piece.
Okay, I see.
Now, that visceral reaction, calling things batshit or crazy, it feels genuine, right? Especially given what's being alleged.
Yeah, accusations of conspiracy, even hinting at murder with the Mikey McCoy video stuff. Doesn't the audience almost expect some level of outrage? How do you balance that sort of necessary anger with objective analysis?
That's the key question. And the answer, I think, is to channel that energy. We need to transition from just reacting emotionally to logically dismantling. So the suggestion is reframe the critique. Focus purely on the logical flaws, the self-contradictions, and what the opponent is presenting.
Ah, okay.
Let the evidence of just how incoherent it is speak for itself. The audience can then conclude it's irrational on their own without you needing to stick the label crazy on it explicitly.
Right. So instead of just shouting, that's crazy, you're building this inescapable logic trap around their claims. Makes sense. Can you give a concrete example, maybe with that Mikey McCoy video point, since it's so extreme?
Sure. Let's take that segment. The opponent is suggesting, based on how fast a phone was supposedly dialed, that it implies murder.
Yeah, a huge leap.
A huge leap. So instead of just saying, this is the level of crazy we've bottomed out to, you analyze the argument's structure.
How would that sound?
You could say something like, the structural weakness here is that the audience has to accept this really unusual interpretation of a totally mundane action, dialing a phone, as actual proof of a premeditated conspiracy.
Okay.
You'd follow up by pointing out it ignores the obvious, rational reasons someone might dial quickly in an emergency, calling for help, contacting staff, whatever. So you're still showing how absurd the claim is, but you're doing it by dissecting its flawed logic, not just reacting to how wild it sounds.
Got it. That feels much stronger, actually. Turns defensiveness into something more. Surgical, using the passion but channeling it into precision. Okay, so once the language is tightened up like that, there's another issue, kind of a sprawl.
Yeah?
The material hits so many different things. There's the political conspiracy stuff, the complaint about the succession plan, then a very personal defense of Erika Kirk as the wife, and then this quite deep dive into the Christian revival happening at TPUSA now.
Right.
And then, boom, right in the middle, a commercial read for WebRoot.
That density, that mix, that brings us straight to the second major opportunity, establishing a single, cohesive thesis.
Okay, cohesion.
The weakness here is pretty clear, right? The critique's overall punch is just diffuse. It's weaving together, 4 very distinct high-stakes arguments? Conspiracy, succession, personal defense, theological impact, and the ad read.
Yeah.
Without one clear central point driving everything, it weakens the main goal, which seems to be debunking the attack on TPUSA's leadership and how it operates. You get this kind of narrative whiplash, like you said, jumping from, murder accusations to talking about high school worship events.
It definitely feels like the listener felt this strong need to defend the organization on every single front. Political, personal, spiritual, which is understandable.
Totally understandable.
But trying to cram all of that into one commentary piece makes the whole thing feel a bit structurally shaky.
Exactly. So the suggestion is structure the entire commentary around one single powerful lens. Maybe something like the strategic attack on Charlie Kirk's intent and legacy. Then every segment either needs to feed directly into that thesis or it needs to be clearly marked off, compartmentalized.
Okay, like the ad read.
Yeah, and that really powerful section about the Christian revival, the worship videos. It's moving stuff, but unless it can be immediately and very clearly tied back to the specific accusation that the opponent, as a Christian, is trying to destroy his literal legacy, it probably needs to be cut way down or saved for a totally separate piece.
That's tough, but I see the point. It needs focus. What about that webroot ad read just dropped in the middle? I mean, that's a pure structural interruption. Assume it has to be there.
Yeah. If the placement is fixed, non-negotiable, then you absolutely need strong signposting around it. You can't just drop it in. You need to transition clearly.
Like?
Okay, that helps maybe say something like, before we continue dissecting the political claims, a brief word on staying safe online. Then after the ad, you explicitly bring the audience back. Okay, returning to the point about the succession plan. Structure is everything there to minimize the disruption.
Okay, that helps. Now, thinking about the argument itself, if the listener has to choose a main battlefield, say, political structural versus the moral theological angle, how does that choice affect what gets cut?
Good question. So if the main goal is political and structural debunking the conspiracy, defending the succession plan, then that long, quite personal defense of Erika Kirk, it needs to be trimmed way down. Make it one sharp, concise point addressing the opponent's claim about being the only trusted person. Use it, but don't let it become its own major section.
Okay. And if they go the other way, focus on the moral theological?
Then the critique needs to really lead into that question raise. Why would she, as a Christian, want to destroy his legacy and something bringing God to people? Make that the central question. In that case, you'd prune back the detailed political points. Only keep what's absolutely necessary to show the kind of intent that undermines her claims to a moral high ground.
Right. You risk losing that high ground if you get too bogged down in factual tit-for-tat on the political side.
Exactly. Discipline here means sometimes sacrificing points that are good on their own in service of making one overall argument truly great.
That forces real editorial choices, making sure every single piece serves that central thesis. Okay, now let's shift to the evidence itself. Specifically, the evidence the opponent uses. A really key piece is that 2018 text exchange.
The David text?
Right, where Kirk supposedly foresaw his death and called her his David to finish the fight. The listener's critique hits hard on the fact that these texts are so old, and the relationship obviously changed.
And that's a valid point. But this is where we can maximize the value of looking at that evidence. This is the third area.
Okay.
The weakness isn't in pointing out the texts are old. That's true. The weakness is missing the bigger opportunity, analyzing the strategic implications of the opponent relying only on communication from, 7 years ago? To prove this massive claim that she was the only person Kirk trusted now or near the end, just saying the texts are old isn't nearly as powerful as analyzing the vacuum of recent evidence.
I see what you mean. The opponent is essentially building this huge claim, I am the sole defender he trusts, on a foundation that's incredibly thin and outdated. So the listener shouldn't just say it's old. They should attack the foundation itself, attack the rhetorical strategy of using strategic omission, making something historical seem current.
Exactly. That's perfectly put. So the suggestion is transform that observation about the text's age into a deeper analytical point. Focus on the strategic meaning of the absence of current communication.
How does that shift the critique?
It dissects the opponent's whole strategy. It implies that the lack of any recent texts is actually the strongest evidence against her claim of being the sole trusted person. You shift from just defending the current leadership against an old claim to actively attacking the very integrity of the evidence being presented against them. You turn defense into offense.
Okay, I like that. It's more proactive. How do we phrase that? Give me some concrete examples of how that sounds sharp and focused.
Okay, so instead of just repeating those texts are so old, you could pose these high-impact analytical questions directly to the audience. Questions that highlight the strategic desperation involved.
Like what?
Like, if she was truly the one person Kirk trusted to finish the fight, why isn't there one single text message, not one email, no communication from 2022 or 2023 that she can point to back that up?
That puts the burden of proof back squarely on the opponent.
Right. Or you could state it more as a conclusion, something like, the most damning evidence against her entire narrative isn't what she shared from 2018. It's the complete, total absence of any recent proof, which actually confirms the relationship had indeed changed significantly.
Okay, that frames the silence itself as the definitive evidence. It uses the listener's own knowledge of the timeline to build an undeniable counter.
Precisely. It leverages what the audience likely already suspects.
That's a huge improvement. It makes the audience almost collaborators in the analysis, right? Forcing them to see the strategic holes in the opponent's case.
These 3 adjustments really do shift a material from just reacting, even if reacting well, to performing disciplined, high-level analysis.
Yeah, I think so. We've sort of moved from a necessary emotional defense posture to laying out a really sharp, evidence-based dismantling of the opponent's position. The foundation in the original material is very strong. This is just about applying that analytical discipline to really maximize its impact. Okay, so let's quickly summarize the actionable suggestions for the first. Elevate the tone. Focus on the logical inconsistencies, the evidentiary leaps, rather than just the emotions like crazy.
Right. Let the logic do the heavy lifting.
Second, sharpen the focus. Adopt one single cohesive thesis, either political structural or maybe moral theological, and stick to it. Avoid diluting the argument by trying to cover too many different threads at once.
Make those tough editorial choices.
And third, deepen the critique of the evidence. Don't just say the 2018 texts are old. Analyze the strategic importance of the absence of any recent communication to really dismantle that core claim of unique trust.
Exactly. Focus on the gap.
Implement those 3 changes, and I think this commentary becomes not just compelling, but really, really hard to argue against. Undeniable, maybe. Excellent. We genuinely look forward to seeing the refined work. Please do feel free to submit your material back to us for a follow-up critique once you've had a chance to make these adjustments.